All right. So once again, I welcome you all to today's session. So today will just be continuation of our Django series. So in one of our last or previous sessions, so we've covered the basic and we've also deep dived into the primary architecture of Django. So we checked the model. We now understand how to route our words URL. So we also appreciated the use of view, right? So we also deep dived into the global project. So how to do the global settings configuration. So by registering our application and also by what inserting other basic configuration for our global application or for our global project to recognize everything or every program we are writing in our words in our application. So we also ventured into models, right? So as we all know, model is just basically handling the logical database, right? It is very similar to using MySQL, but in the case of Django, so we don't use model. Sorry, we don't use MySQL directly or manually. So we just leverage on the existing architecture, right, to make our work very easy and fast. So today, what we want to do today is we are going to be looking into templates, right? So you want to understand what templates is, and templates has varying use cases, right? So for templates, it's actually very broad. So how it is being used, we can use it statically, right? So you can use like a static template. You can also use a dynamic template, right? So, and also we can also use templates. So while we are also using while we are also using templates dynamically, it also has its own sub-concepts. So which are what's required for its functionalities, right? So amongst them is understanding the template language itself and also appreciating the template. There's something we also call template tag, and there is also something we call variable interpolation. So all of these make up templates, right? So we need to understand all of these concepts if truly templates would make sense, right? So without further ado, so we would be starting now, right? So now to use templates, I would like to do a brief revisit to recollect our attention to why we need templates, because it is not only how to use it, we also need to understand why we need to use it, right? So in our last session, so we were able to use an alternative to templates, right? So which was HTTP response. If we can all recall, so in our last session, why we were able to have something displayed to the screen. So what we used then was what? Using the HTTP response. So for instance, let's say I cd into bookstore, right? So in this bookstore, if we check if we check our views file, so let me enter inside views. So here, if you can see here, so what we did was using HTTP response, right? So basically, we just used a string literal in our own case, but however, we can also use like a complete HTML code snippets in case or in place of this string literal of welcome to my bookstore, right? So you can use something like an hashtag for HTML. So also inserting the same text, which is what? Welcome to my bookstore. So, and if you run it, it would also display that to the screen, right? So the display will just be different owing to how it is being used. Now, what if in a case we have a long list of HTML program or snippets? Do we come here and still be typing it manually, So we can imagine how messy our program would be, right? So having to still use the view, right? To still use the view to now insert a long list of HTML coupled with CSS code, because we want to what, use it as our what, user interface. So that will be cluttered and make our, it wouldn't even make our program to be what, clean. And we all know the importance of writing a what, a clean program. So this is why we are now, or this is why Django now also introduce the adoption or the deployment of what, templates. So template is just basically like HTML file, right? So that is where we can now write all our HTML code. So something we want to display to the end user. So as we all know, interacting with what, websites. So what we see many a time is what, we just see like a static um print or display of what, text and characters. So that will be what, aesthetically what, designed. So depending on what has been what, hard coded to display, right? So now let's say in our case, we are building an online bookstore, right? So you are building an online bookstore. So it is expected of us to have like a system or a program or a website that says when our end user visits the home page, so there should be something that will be displayed to them, right? So we should also have like other pages on our website that would have specific display depending on the requirement or depending on the objective of our what, website. Now, so um this is where templates come in what, play. This is where templates come in what, in play. So how do we use templates? So to use templates, there's actually a convention, right? So there's a convention to the use of templates. So the convention is what, by creating a template directory inside our application. So we need to create a template directory inside our what, inside our application. So and for us to create this template directory, so we would be starting by understanding how to use a static templates, right? So static template is just like we just having our view to go and fetch our HTML file inside like a dummy inside like a dummy file, right? So we don't want it to be displayed dynamically. So we don't have any custom. We just want it to display anything and everything we already have inside that file. So that is what we want it to what, to display. Just want to display everything we have inside the file. So we don't want any customization. We don't want it to have any other what, attributes different from what we have what, coded in that HTML file. So that is we using templates statically, right? So and how do we use a static template? So it is very what, straightforward. So currently we are in our what, app projects directory. So so I will cd a step backward just for us to, just for visibility, right? So if you can still remember, so in our last session, our app project was what, named bookstore, right? So in this bookstore, to now start interacting with templates. So the first thing we need to do is to what, to cd into the bookstore, right? So you want to enter inside the bookstore. So then after entering inside the bookstore, so then this is where you want to create your template file. Then and to create template file, you can say mkdir, then we say what, templates. After creating this, the next thing is to what, cd into the templates what, file. So then after it's been entered, we can see we have an empty folder, right? Empty directory. So by convention, um you might want to ask, why do we still need to create the application directory again inside the what, template directory? So that is just Django convention. So what Django wants is, okay, fine. You cd inside that application directory. Inside the application directory, you create a template folder. Then inside the template folder, you now recreate the application folder again. So giving it the same naming convention. So in our case, we call it what? Bookstore. So you just say mkdir, then we say what? Bookstore, right? So when this is created, so this is where the Django engine would go to search for any template file and what? Use it as HTTP response when there is an what? HTTP request by any URL, right? Coming from the global URL that is connected to the what? To the app URL. So this is what gives the Django engine that will connect the dots, the pointer to go and check inside here. This is okay, tells it this is where you can find that template you want to respond to the user, right? That you want to display to the what? To the user. So now that we have created this, so you need to open the what? The bookstore. So let's say we've opened the bookstore, right? So the next thing you want to do now is now that we are inside the bookstore, so this is where we now start creating our templates. So templates is just like a naming convention, right? So basically it is just us creating a file, but the file we are creating is what? HTML file. So we are creating an HTML file, right? So now let's say what we want to design now, we want to design our home page for our what? Web browser, which is what? Our e-bookstore. So we want to design the home page. So how do we want the home page to look like? So when a user visits our website and they are in the home page, so what do we want to display to them? So and we are doing this using the static template management. So we are still coming to how to use it dynamically, but currently we are using it static. So then what we do is just give it a name, right? You can call it anything. So just ensure we give it to us an extension of what? HTML. So now I'm going to use VI to create this. So 1 second, please. One second, please. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I just had to attend to something very quickly. Okay, so now that we are creating this home template, so this is where we just want to have our what? HTML home page designed, right? So if I enter inside this file, right? So yeah, basically what you want to write here is just what? An HTML code. So, and styling it with what? CSS. So this is where you want to beautify your website. So how you want it to display. So I already have a code snippet that I'll just copy and paste here, right? So it can be anything depending on how you want your display to be. So I have an HTML and a CSS file here, right? So I'll just copy this and paste it in that file. Then we can um, continue from there. So let me just copy this. So for some of us that are familiar with um, using HTML, so this is just what basically like we designing the front end of our web application. So that's what we are just doing basically. We are just designing the front end of our web application. So as we all agree, that is what we use HTML and CSS for, right? So I'm trying to where am I? Where am I? Where am I? Where am I? Why isn't this one displaying anything? Okay, so let me say I'm entering inside the bookstore, right? So let's see the inside the bookstore. Okay, so I'm coming 1 second. So I think, okay, so I would create the file again, home.html. Then I'll paste the snippet here. So as you can see it here, it's pasted here, right? So basically, these are just what HTML tags and what styling, the font style, the font color, the background color, the background style. We want our page to what to look like. So that is what we are doing here. So then, okay, fine. So my concern now is there are some texts we can just make some slight modification to, like how we want it to display, right? So in this case, so we want our heading to first display on the screen, welcome to book Irving, right? So this will be our like the heading, right, of our page. So this should be displayed first. Right, so welcome to book Irving. So you can call it anything. So then next to that, we also want to have like another text displayed. So in this case, so we are calling it discover your next great read. So we have various of what books, so ranging from fiction, self-help, blah blah blah, right? So then here is what I also have. I also want another thing to also be what included in this home page design. So then this is where I want to have some of my books listed, right? The books we have rather. So some of our books, we want to have it just listed. So amongst those books are what? So we have like something like Python programming. So then we also want something like, okay, by the author of the book, right? So then another next to that, you also want to have another book, right? So we just replace this one with the title of a book. So let's call this purple. Let's say we want to call this purple hibiscus, right? So let's call this purple hibiscus. So let me um change the initials to uppercase. So we are calling this popular hibiscus. So by, okay, so let's say by Chimamanda, right? Is it Ngozi? I think Ngozi or something. So now, okay, fine. This is our next book. So then following that, you also have another book we want to change. So let's call this, you can say this is cyber security for beginners, right? So then this is for beginners. So by who? So you can say by Sunday Onoja, right? So let's assume, okay, this is fine, right? So we already have like you already all have an idea of what we are trying to do. So okay, so we also have a footer. So footer is what we have at the bottom of the page, right? So you just want to add something like, okay, 2005 book Arvon. So I also want to display that this interface is built using what Django. So this is just basically your purely HTML and CSS code. Okay, fine. Let's assume we are fine with this. So the next thing you want to do is what? You want to be sure that this thing is working. So then as part of this session's discourse, so we would also be doing like a brief recap of URL mapping, right? So since we already have our what template, so how do we now connect these templates to be displayed on the screen, right? So do users just go to our home page and have all these things displayed? Nope. So we still need to what? Go inside our view file, then to do what we know as what? This is where we now want to do the passing, right? We want to do what we know as the HTML passing. So we want to pass this template to the view. You know, when the URL receives the request, so it checks the view, right? It asks the view, so do you have any return or any response for this request? It is now the view that now check, okay, fine. I don't have, but I have the address of who has it. So that is what we want to do now. So we want to give view the address so that anytime it's been checked, view can now link them or connect them to this our template. So that is why we need to now go into our view, right? So let's say we are now, okay, so this is now our view. So we can enter the views, right? So when we enter the view, now, unlike our usual pattern of using HTTP response, so now we want to render. So as I have mentioned, amongst what we'll be discussing today is also what render. So now you want to render the template to view, right? So it's like handling over template to what? To view. Okay, view. Now be in care of what? Of this template, right? So we are handling it over to you. So if you now enter inside this what? So the first thing we want to take note of is what? Is ensuring you have this you have you import render. So, and where do you import render from? So you import render from the Django.shortcuts. So this module import is very important. Otherwise, so there will be an issue, right? So you want, the first thing you want to say is, so by default, view are one of the what pre-installed files, right? While we start our application. So it comes by default. But for some cases, if you open your view and you can't find it, so the first thing you want to do is to what? To state from Django.shortcuts imports render. So now we can get rid of the HTTP because we are not using HTTP anymore. So, but since there is actually no conflicts for it being what existing, coexisting, right? So we can also what leave it at the same time. So now what we want to do now is we now want to what do render, right? So we want to render our home template of HTML to what? To view. So the thing we say, what you say, what you now come here and say what? Home, right? So why are we naming this as home? We are going to understand that in a second. So we still leave the parameter as request, right? But instead of returning HTTP response, so now we are now going to return render, right? So now we are returning render. So now following render, the first parameter or argument it takes is what? Request, right? So because it's what? It's receiving the request coming from the what? From the HTTP. So when it now receives this request, so the next thing it wants to do is it wants to map it to the what? The templates that we've just created, right? So I'm trying to bring up my keyboard. Okay, so then following the request, you want to add a comma, right? Then followed by the paths. Followed by the path. I mentioned it while we were creating our templates. The reason why we needed to now recreate the application directory. So that is what we are doing here. So this is what would help the Django search engine to run the connection for us. So in our case, what did we call it again? I'm believing it's bookshelf, right? So I'm believing our app project is named bookshelf. So now bookshelf, we are now stating the paths to our template. So now when you get to bookshelf that we've created inside the template directory, so you would find our home.html file there. So and you want to ensure this is in what? In quotes, but it's string, right? So you want to ensure it's in what? It's in quotes. So stating it as a what? As a string. So then when you do this, so that is all we need to do. So we are fine, right? So we have rendered the template to view so that when there is a response or there is a request from HTTP, so it's just render it. Okay, go and check this folder. There's a template there. This is what we want you to display on our home page, right? So that is what we did basically here. So then the next thing we also want to check is we also want to confirm if our URL is still correctly mapped, because as you can all remember, following the global URL that will point to our application URL, right? So it is inside our application URL that now what connects what we have inside our view, right? So now the next thing we just need to check is to confirm if our application URL is still what correctly mapped. So we want to enter inside our application URL and see that. So as you can see it here, so we still have some changes we need to what to make. So we still have from the same directory, we are still importing views, right? So this is fine. So what we are doing basically here is, okay, fine, check this same directory that we are and import the view file. So then we want to make this view file or this URL, we are mapping our home, our home page, right? So don't forget, in our case, our function name is what? Home. So you want to change this to what? To home. So you also want to change this one too. So the reason why we are naming this, so this would only make sense by the time we start to learn template inheritance. So this is where and when this naming convention we've been doing would make sense. So, and we would understand this in one of our what next session. Okay, so you just want to give this like a typical name, like a descriptive name, right? And you want to make it unique because why it must be unique, you would understand it when we get to template inheritance in our next sessions. So now we just want to call this. So since this is a what home page for our bookstore, so you can just say book home, something like that. So you can call it anything actually. So let's just call it book home, right? So let's say this is book home. So it's just like an identifier, right? We'll be needing it in subsequent settings or some subsequent build. Okay, now we've been able to map the view or the URL to our view file, right? So let's be sure everything is in place. Okay, fine. So after this views.home, then name book home, right? So let's assume this is fine, right? So you also want to check global URL to ensure everything aligns. I will cd into that now, right? Check my project directory, then check the URL. So you want to say you want to enter inside this URL. And check, okay, fine. So we have the one of the requirement is to to also import include, right? So which you have in place. So then our path. So you want to make this let's make this our home directory so that anytime they visit the home page, so this is what's been displayed for them. So we now say inside the bookstore, we are connecting it to the URL inside the bookstore. So if this is bookstore, so that is, there will be an issue for us naming the other one bookshelf. So let me confirm what it is specifically so that we can be sure instead of what's guessing. Okay, it is bookstore. It is bookstore. So since it is bookstore, I will need to change that from bookstore to from bookshelf to bookstore. So I will be doing that inside our our URL. So let me enter inside the URL again. Okay. Oh, sorry, inside our view rather. So if we check the views.py, so it shouldn't be bookshelf, it should be bookstore. So, and I think I also named the app we have inside our templates as bookshelf also. I will need to confirm that too so that we don't encounter any error. So let me check that too. So I will check, let me enter inside the bookstore again. So inside this bookstore, then I want to check the template to confirm what this is named. Okay, this one is fine. So it is actually named bookstore. So it is fine. So then inside our bookstore, we already have our template, our home.html file. Awesome, awesome. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to ensure that we have registered our application. I stressed the importance of we always ensuring that any application we are building inside our global project should be registered. Otherwise, there will be an error at runtime, right? So that is the next thing you want to check. So we'll be going to see our global settings configuration to ensure our application is installed. So now, for some of us that are still confused of what we need to register, where do we get the data to enter inside the installed app, right? So this is where we get it. So you want to check that in your bookstore. So in your project application, right? So you want to check here. So I want to check apps. So let's cut apps.py. So if you check inside this app, so this is where you want to register. So um you want to ensure that Django projects as a whole is aware of this book app application you are creating. Because if you don't register it inside the global application installed amongst the installed applications at the global level, so it wouldn't recognize anything as what bookstore, right? So we would take the class name. So the class name we have here is what we have bookstore config. So then what are we doing here? So since we have bookstore config, so we want to go into our project, the global project. So in this case, it is what my project, right? If there is any question, please let me know. I will be happy to respond to it. Okay, so now we want to check the settings.py. So if you check inside the settings.py, so this is where we now come to what to register our application. So I remember we've done this in our last session. So now I'll just do a brief recap. So what we are doing is we are just stating the part where the Django settings would find the words this application we created. So how do we state the navigation part? So the first thing is what, okay, fine. If you enter inside the bookstore application we created, then inside it, you'll find another file named apps. So inside that apps, there's a class defined in it. So which is what we just checked tonight is what bookstore config, right? So this is the only way the global project now understand that, okay, fine, there is an application named this. So I think we are good with this. So the next thing you want to do now is we now want to run our server. You want to now check if truly our server will display everything we've what coded as our what UI, right? So that is what you want to check now. So you want to say, okay, so we now want to go to our manage directory and run our server to check if everything is working as expected. Okay, so I will run I believe we are all familiar with this command, right? So we say python manage.py, right? Then run server. So when we run this, then we can check our browser and see, okay, we didn't get any error. It means everything is fine. And 1 second, please. Okay, sorry guys. Okay, so now that we've run the server, then we can check what we have displayed on our screen. Okay, so I want to create um an in private browser here, right? Then in as we normally check, right? So we just go to localhost and stating the ports 8000, right? So then when we click that, so can we see what we have displayed on the screen, right? So let me take this off if this will be disturbing us. Okay, so as you can see it on the screen here. So if you remember our HTML templates, so in the first H tag, right? So what we stated was what we want to name. Okay, our bookstore, our store name or our brand name is what Book Haven, right? So in this Book Haven, so you can see all this one are not really interactive at the moment because we've not done any mapping, right? We've not done any mapping or any configuration to make it responsive. So they are just dummy. But what I just want us to appreciate is the fact that the HTML and the CSS file we've configured is now displayed for us on the screen. So as you can see here, so all those things, all this long code we've seen, so this is what they just did, right? So as you see here, we have like a square bracket, like a square box, right? So where we have our sample books. So we have Python programming by Ibrahim Olaroyin. We have Popular Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi. And we also have Cybersecurity for Beginners by Sunday Onoja. So, and as I also stated, right, so while I was modifying the HTML file, so you can also see our footer here. Right, so in this footer, we have 2025 displayed. So we have Book Haven, and this is also built with what using Django. So now this approach is what is known as what static templates. Again, this approach is what is known as what a static templates, right? Now, now that we understand static templates and how it's being used, we would now be what moving into understanding how to use a dynamic template, right? So as I have said before, we have two approaches to using templates. The first one is what static and the other one is what dynamic. Now for dynamic is where we now need to now learn and understand the template language. So template has its language, right? So we have something we call variable interpolation, right? So variable interpolation is like passing variable inside your template. So you define that variable, or you define like you give your view like a context. So you want to give your view a context, right? Then pass it to the templates. So how can we do all of this? We are going to appreciate that in a second. Also, in addition to we using variable interpolation, so there's also something we call template tag. And for template tag are useful or handy every time or anytime we want to use or we want to do anything like control flow, right? Anytime we are including control flow, right, in our program. So that is when we can use template tag. So let's say we want to use if statements in our program, or when we want to use loops in our program. So these are when, or the right time, we need to use what the template tag, right? So now let's check how this works practically and what visually. So now that we are fine with this one, right? So we will be moving to the next instance. So I'm going to stop the server now, right? So I've stopped the server. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go and create another template. But before creating the template, right? So I think the first thing we need to do is to what? To go into our views and what? Write the program. So what we want the view to do, how we want the view to what? To pass the variable into what? Into our template. So we would now be moving or navigating into the view. Okay, so we are still inside my project. So let's see the inside my project, right? I want to enter inside the bookstore, right? So now that we are inside the bookstore, the next thing we want to do is we are inside the bookstore. We want to um go inside our views now, right? So now we can just say vi views, right? .py. So now that we are inside our view, so now let's pay close attention here, please. So this is when we can now appreciate how to use a template dynamically. So the first thing we want to do is to what? We want to ensure that we have a context, right? So this is now the context that we want to render. So we are still doing rendering, but this is the context we want to render. But we want this render to be dynamic instead of the other display that just displayed everything we've coded on the screen. So you want this one to be dynamic. That is, it is now inside our template that we can now define what we want something to be, right? So it shouldn't just be generic, right? So we want it to be what? To be granular. So in this case, so you can just say that what in our template, in our views, we now define the what? The context. So how do we define context? So it's not really far-fetched at all. So context could be defined using different data structure, right? So you can either use a list or you can use a dictionary. So depending on the requirements, right? So in our case, we'll be using a dictionary. So for this dictionary, what we just want to do is, okay, fine. We just want to, okay, let's say we are building another program. So this program, we want to personalize user interaction or user engagement in the program. So for example, when a user signs in, so you just want to greet the user and returning the username, right? And also giving some other information about the user after it's been what returned or after there is an HTTP response. So in this case, so I just want to have something that, okay, fine, when I sign in, I want it to greet me and say, hello, so, you are this and that, and your this and this are what this. So how do we do that? So the first thing you want to do is what? You want to come into this um, function, right? Then inside this function, this is where we now start defining our what? Our context. So the first thing you want to do, you want to say context, right? So when you say context, so don't forget we are using a dictionary. So we first define the variable context, right? So then we can open our dictionary, right? So then inside here, we define our key. So the key is what? Name, right? So I'm giving the name. So I want to call the name. Let me look for someone they'll be using. Okay, so you want to call the name Dadamosi, right? So Dadamosi is signing in. So we are giving it a name. So our name is who? Dadamosi, Dadamosi, right? So okay, fine. These are what our value. So you can still remember the key value pair of a dictionary. So we've given it a name. So then we want to define another key value pair, right? So then we want to say age, right? So which should be our key. And we want to say this age is what? 18, right? Then we want to move to the next one and state that are mostly skills, right? So you want to say his skills are what? Let's say in this case, is proficient in what? Python. So now since we have like arrays of skills that Amose is proficient in or on. So we expect us to have everything like stored in a data structure that can accept multiple what elements. So in this case, we want to use lists, right? So the first one is what? Python, right? So these are just elements of lists that we are all familiar with. Then followed by Django, right? Then let's say the next one is, okay, something is in the chat. Let me see what we have in the chat. Is there a way you can pass username maybe from the database? Yes, we can also do that from the database, right? You can also do that from the database. So um then the next one is okay, we say Python, Django, and let's just say MySQL, right? So let's just say MySQL. So then I think this should be enough, right? Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to close our what? Our dictionary. So let me close the dictionary, right? So now, the next thing we need to pay attention to here is now in our render return, we now need to state one more argument here. We need to impute one more argument here because this is what would give this Python engine the indication that, okay, fine, we also have a context that we want to render into our HTML templates. So anytime there is a request for it, include this context also in it, depending on what has been defined or programmed in the template. So we should be doing next. Okay, so now we want to state here that in addition to you checking this home HTML template file, right? So now also reference the context. All right. So now we just say context. So then that is all we need to do, right? So we are done with what? The view rendering. We are done with the view rendering. Now we want to define how we then want this to be displayed on the screen, right? So what we've done here is what we've done the dynamic rendering, right? So we now want to go and define the template tags and also the what variable interpolation, right? So how do we do all of this? So then we can now go again inside our HTML templates, so which we have inside templates, right? So this is inside template. I believe we check inside this bookstore. All right. So here we have our HTML. So what is what I'm going to do? I would be renaming this initial HTML sample file into something else so that we can have a new HTML home file that we'll be using for our dynamic template. So I will remove this. I would rename this. I'll be calling this mv home.html, right? So let me just rename it to home1.html. Okay, so then we can now create a new HTML file that would now have our templates inside. So we can now call this home.html. So the reason I'm renaming it is because I still want to use the same mapping. So I don't want to be going into or inside URL, still changing the name we've already mapped, right? So if we still leave it as home, so it still recognize it as what? As home. So it doesn't disrupt our previous configuration. So we can enter here now. So what we want to do here now is this is where we now start defining our rendering, right? So we have two options here to render. So one of them is to use a variable approach. So variable is just okay, fine. If I just want to say hello Dadamosi, so what I just need to just reference and I'll just pass that variable, right? In a case of name that we have defined in that dictionary. So when the context now sends name, which is the key. So it's now respond or return the value, which is what Badamosi. So all we did there is variable interpolation. But what if I want to do some control flows and some logic, right? So maybe I want to loop over, as in our case, we also have a list of skills, right? So what if we want to loop over all those skills and display it on the screen? So this is where we now use template tag, right? Or if you want to use an if statement, so we also use template tag. So how do we use a template tag? So you are going to appreciate this in a second. Okay, so yeah, we can just say, okay, fine. I actually have a file we can just I'll be copying this from, right? I just have to paste it here. And I will explain. I'll explain the lines, right? Let me see. Okay, so I have it here. So let's start with this. 1 second. Okay, so we are going to start with this. Okay, so let's say this, then we come here, right? Let me copy. So here also you can actually write it as per your requirements. So you can use HTML styling, HTML like tags. So depending on what you are trying to achieve. So, but in this case, it will be very basic, right? Just for testing purpose. So now, what I want is, so can you see what we are doing here? So let me expand this. So what we are doing here is we are now using variable interpolation, right? So how is it variable interpolation? Because we are just referencing the name. Can you see? So this is where the variable interpolation is in what is in play. So this is how you define a what a template, right? So this is how you render a what a template. So this is how to render a template. So by using this what variable interpolation. So to just pass data from view, all the data we have inside our view, right? Inside that dictionary we define, it will now pass it here. So since we've stated it here that, okay, name, any name we have inside our view, now replace it with this word name. So now also the age, right? So anything we state as the age should also be replaced with what? This age placeholder, right? So in this case, so we want to say hello engineer, any name we give, then you are this so years old, depending on what we have as our what age. So now let's see how this works in action when we run our what our server. Then we can now move into how to use the what template tag, right? So these are what template languages. So the first thing we've just seen now is what dynamically giving a data within a template, right? So let's just leave here. Let's leave here, right? Okay. So we have our home.html. So we'll be going some step backward. So I want to believe everything is fine here up to this minute. Okay, so we still need to go a step backward here, right? So then we now want to run our server to check if our output is displayed as what as programmed, right? So what do you have displayed? Okay, let's have our hands fold, right? So we have our hands folded and what anticipating what the output would be. So I'll be running this as a Python manage.py, then run server. So when I run this, hopefully we don't get any error. Okay, all seem to be fine. Our server is up and running. Then let's check. So I'm going to refresh this. So we should now have a different home page now. So let me just close this and open a new browser, right? So we are going to go to the same local host, right? So let's display. So can we see it now? So can we see what we have displayed on the screen? So now if we now check, so how do you now confirm if what is displayed on the screen is what you have scripted, right? So you can just check for view page source, right? So as we all know, many of us would be familiar with this. So if you check browser page. So if you want to know the source code of anything that is displayed on the screen, so you can actually use this option. So can you see? So can you see that it's returning what we coded inside our what we rendered inside our templates? Can you see? That is what it's been returned, right? So this is an indication that what we are working with our HTTP response dynamically. How is it dynamic? It's dynamic because we we interpolate a variable from a view, right? From a view and rendered it. We rendered like we rendered like a variable interpolation from our view file, right? And define it how we want it to be displayed in our what HTML template. So this is what makes it dynamic. So now that we understand how to use a variable interpolation, so what is variable? What is template tag? Right? What is template tag and how do we use template tag? So template tag is just basically almost the same thing as what the um as the template as the variable interpolation we've just used, right? So it's just have like a different template language. So its own different template language. So we have something like it's uses ampersand, right? So which you have your loop constructs inside the ampersand, right? So while you are starting, so unlike what we are familiar with using for loop in Python, so this has to be inside a bracket, like inside a block. So it's called a tag block. So that tag block would be like a curly braces. So when you open that curly braces, there will be a percentage. Then in between the percentage, this is where you now state the control flow you are using, the conditional statement you are using. If you're using for loop, you open the curly braces, a percentage, then for, then you close, and then another percentage, then you close the curly braces. The same thing for what? For if statements, right? And also if you want to use it for filter, you still use the same thing. Then, however, as per convention, anytime you are done with your control flow and logic, you want to ensure you now end the loop, or you want to ensure you end the if statement, right? So how do we do all of this? We are going to see them um, in action in a moment. So we want to go back to our template and do some modification. So this is where and when we can now understand how to use our template tag, right? So I will be ending the server now. Okay, so let's check the bookstore again to find our templates. Okay, so I'll seed into the templates, then seed into bookstore, I believe. Okay, so in this bookstore, we have our home.html. Okay, so here we now to add more information of that I must see to be displayed on the screen. So we also want to include his skills, right? Maybe he's building his portfolio, right? He's building his portfolio. So he's saying, hello, I am engineer, so. I am this years of old, age, right? Rather. So then my skill sets are so, right? So I don't forget, since the skills are elements of a list, for us to list it or have it displayed, we need to use a for loop, and that would um direct us to using the template tag. So let me just fetch the code snippet very quickly so that it should make us work smarter and faster. Okay, 1 second. Okay, fine. So yeah, this is it, right? So we'll be copying this. So you just want to copy this and paste it here, right? So you want to paste it here. Okay, so now let me explain what these lines infer. So now inside this, so don't forget, this is still like what's using HTML tags, right? So inside this, we wanted to display, okay, your skills. So then underneath this headline or head tag of this your skill, we now want to loop into every skills we have inside our words, our context dictionary we defined inside our view for our view file that we've rendered, that we've already rendered. So now, as per convention, so I've said, so to use any control flow, so the first thing you want to do is what you want to put it inside a tag block, right? So then you say for skill. in skills, right? Which is the standard usage of for loop. But unlike how it's being used or how it is used in Python, right? So the syntax is different here, right? So the syntax is different, but it's somewhat similar. So just say for skill in skills, don't forget the list name is what we gave it skills. So loop over all the skill in the skills list, all the elements and print skill. That's what we are saying here. So the next line is what? Then skill, then print skills. All the skills, print it on the screen. Then, as said earlier, you want to end your what? Your loop. So that is why we now have what? End for. So this is what we known as what? The template tag. And we use template tag only on only while we are what? Using for loop, if statements, or we are doing some filters. So we also use template tag what with filters, right? So these are the three reasons or three things that could make us to want to use what? A template tag. So let's just check now, right? So let's see. So we are going to run our server again and refresh the browser to see what we now have displayed on the screen. So where are we? Okay, so let's go to our manage configuration. Um, okay, so here we can run it again. So I'll just be bringing the command up. So I just want to run the server, right? Okay, so it's ran successfully. So let's just refresh and see what we have on the screen. So can you see it here, right? So all this, can you see it's also listed, right? Um using like it's listed, right? We have Python, we have Django, we have MySQL. So all these are just what HTML defined. So if we check the source, can you see? So it's the same thing that we have defined here. So this the li tag is what makes it to be listed in this what pattern, right? So it's what makes it to be listed in this pattern. So all these are just what HTML front end, right? What language of front end design, right? So all these are markup languages. So HTML is basically a markup language, right? So now we have your skills also displayed, right? So now the next thing you also want to check is what I want to understand how to use the template tag with if statements. So as we all know, we use if statements to check for what? To make decision, right? So to make decision. So in this case, we want to now check some possibilities, right? And um only give acceptance to one of these what checks. So in this case, we want to check if Daramosis age is above 18 years old or below 18 years old. So if the age is above 18 years old, so you want something to be displayed on the screen. And if is below 18 years old, we also want a condition to be what? To be met. So then we go back to our templates and write this logic, right? So let's first stop the server. Then we go to our bookstore. So inside the bookstore, we want to enter templates to modify our templates. So we also need to check in bookstore. Then here we have our what? Our home.html. So in this home.html, right? So we want to add another logic to what we have already on the screen. So you want to understand how to also use an if statement with a what? With a tag. So I also have that here, right? So let me just pull it up very quickly. So let's pull that up here. Okay, so I'll just be explaining. There's something we actually left out in this last one we ran. Okay, so we didn't close this tag here. So let me close this tag very quickly before we continue. 1 second. Let me close this tag. So that's one thing about HTML. So you have open and close tags. Okay, so I believe that is closed. Okay, so that is closed. So then we can copy the next scripts. So we have something in the screen, something in the chat. Sure, unless I don't understand your question. Okay. Um, so the next thing we want to check is how to use the if statement, right? So let's pull up the templates again very quickly. I have some samples there. So just use this. So here, you just want to paste it here, right? So this is also what an HTML. 1 second. 1 second. So we want to say and if. So we don't have it properly indented. We want to be sure everything is properly indented. So here you want to say okay, so what we are saying here is basically, okay, fine. If age is greater than 20, so you want it to display you are an what adult, else you are young and learning fast, right? So, and in our case, we've already programmed Paramosis age to, we tag it to 18. So which of these conditions will be met? We are going to know that in a second. So, and don't forget, anything you are doing, when you use the template tag, right? So you want to end that condition, be it loop or the if statement. So here we say what end if, right? So now that we are ending the if, so there's still some issue with the indentation here. So let me ensure everything is properly indented. Okay, so these are front end languages. Okay, so I want to believe everything is properly indented now. So let's run our server again and see what we have. Let me clear the screen. Okay, so need to move very fast to where we can run the server. Okay, to run server. So I want to run the server. Okay, so the server is up and running. So I'm going to be refreshing the browser now to now see which condition will be met. So can you see it here? So our condition states that if, okay, let's see what our source code is. So can we see it here? Okay, 1 second. If we check our source code from here, so what we say is if the age is less than 18, yeah, if age is less than 18. So can you see it here? If age is greater than 20, right? So you want to say you are an adult, else you are young and learning fast. So that is, if you have anything below 20, so you should indicate or inform the user that is still young and is learning fast. Oh, that's awesome. At this age, so you're already very competent using Python, Django, and MySQL. So it's stating that you are young and what learning fast. So let's just make a small tweak. to our contexts, right? So by using an age greater than 20 and see what our response would be when we would run the server again. So I'm going to stop the server now, right? Just to be sure our logic is working as expected. So where do we find this? We check our what? Our view where we define it. Okay, so we want to check our views .py. So inside the context, so let's say age is 25. So let's say age is 25, right? Then we want to um so you don't need to do anything in our templates anymore. So we already have the tag, right? Handling everything we want it to handle. So we already have the logic defined in our template. So we don't need to do anything. So we just want to be sure it is working as expected. So we'll be running the server again, right? So let's say run server. So let's see what we have. Okay, so I'll refresh. So can you see it has changed, right? So what we are doing is what? Dynamic interaction, depending on the logic we defined inside our templates. So this is what? Using templates dynamically. Can you see everything is changing? It is not just static, unlike the first design we had, unlike the first user interface we had. So that first user interface, there is nothing like dynamic, there is nothing dynamic in that one. So it's just like what display everything that has been coded in it, right? Like a dummy display. So it can't change, it can't tweak, it can't customize anything. So just want to give you back as it is been as it's been received. It's what giving it back. But for dynamic usage of template, so we can make some tweak, right? So can you see we can also customize this for every user, depending on what we have defined as our what as our logic. So basically, these are what the two use cases for what using templates, using templates statically and also using templates what dynamically, right? So then yeah, so that is it basically, right? For what we will be what covering in today's session. Expectedly, we are supposed to also delve into user authentication, right? But because of time, you wouldn't be checking that today. So that would be um that will be our next session, right? That will be our next discourse in our next session, right? So essentially, for a quick recap, so what we've done basically today is what to understanding how to use render, right, in views, how to use render in views, because unlike what we are familiar with, just using HTTP response, right, you would have a robust and a complex program you want to write. So you can't come into your view, right, and start. Imagine the first template we had. Now, imagine we can only use that inside our view. So we would have what? A messy program written, right? We would have a cluttered program written, right? We would have a program that would be very difficult to read. So this is why we also have, this is why Django now has like a built-in option to use the render for what? For your, then to use render. So in this case, templates. Now to use templates, we have two approaches. The first one is to use it what? Dynamically, as we have seen. And the second one is also to use it what? To use a static template, as we have also what? Demonstrated, right? So these are what? This will become handy. So by the time we are writing um like a production program, right? So there will be some cases whereby all you need in that page is just what? A static display. So there will also be some pages where you need to use what a dynamic template. So then in addition to that, we also understand what the template languages are, right? Then we know how to pass variable, right? And how to also use the template tag. And I also mentioned that to use template tag, so all we require is what just to ensure that we are using a control flow. So be it a for loop, if statement, or while using filter, right? So because of time, you'll be ending the session here today. So in our next session, we'll be delving into user authentication, right? So how to create user, how to manage user, how to configure security posture for your program. So for the likes of password complexity, so how do you define your password? Are you accepting specific characters from user? Do you want them to be a mix of character? Okay, fine. Before you can sign, you need to use uppercase, lowercase, alphanumerical, right? So alphanumerical should be mixed with upper and lower, right? And also without you also including like number or other characters. So this password will not be accepted. Okay, fine. The max password length. I want it to be 8. I want it to be 9. I want it to be 10. So how do you define all of this? You would be learning it in our next session. So how do you create users? How do you manage users' accounts? How do you do basic authentication? How do you build a secure end users what interface that would ensure that users information, so specifically user password, are hashed, right? So because all these passwords will also be stored in a model that is in a database, right? So are you storing it plainly or will it be hashed rather? So Django also has like a built-in function for hashing password. So hash is what ensuring that when it is stored in a database, right? So it is not plain, it is not readable, right? To just be displayed like something you can't even understand. So it will be like incomprehensive, right? So how do you do all of this? So we are going to be looking into that in the next session. So having said all of this, it's high time. If there is any question, please do not hesitate to ask, right? So then I will be stopping the recording now just to ensure this is not longer unnecessarily. So if there's any question, please you can ask.